This photograph was taken in 1870. It shows the ruins of Copenhagen's Frederiks Church, what's today referred to as Marmorkirken, or the Marble Church. Here's another photograph of that church taken in 1875. The mainstream historical narrative surrounding the Marble Church is somewhat suspicious. We're told that these ruins represent a church that King Frederick V started to build in 1749, and that Frederick, himself a Freemason, laid the first stone. According to the architectural plans drawn up by Nikolai Eigtved, the church building originally was to have 2 flanking towers, and was much taller. But as the story goes, the Danish government ran short of funds and only completed the church to this point. Then, for a century, these ruins just sat there in the middle of Copenhagen, between Rosenborg and the Castellet. Eventually, the church was completed in 1894, and today it looks like this: a smaller, squattier version of its original alleged plan. Obviously, the problem here is the amount of weathering and aging taking place in supposedly just 100 years. Here's another century-old wall with columns, also in Copenhagen, and these look nothing like the Marble Church ruins look after just 100 years. Neither do these ruins look like a building under construction. This window opening here, for example, looks damaged rather than simply incomplete. And here we see a window opening that continues below ground level, indicating the possibility of a mud flood or liquefaction event. At the same time that this church was allegedly being partially constructed, another building project was begun 1 block closer to the Belt Waterway. These buildings were 4 mansions, built for 4 noble Danish families, on ground that had initially been owned by the Danish crown. Today, what was first known as the Moltke Mansion also shows indications of a liquefaction event covering what used to be doors and windows that opened out above ground level. The mainstream historical narrative is telling us that the Marble Church, or Frederiks Church, went up at the same time as the mansions in Amalienborg, all 4 of which were quickly finished by 1754. But after 20-odd years of sporadic work on the church, the crown only got this far and decided to scrap the church plan altogether, leaving all this expensive marble just sitting here to waste. Not only does this seem highly unlikely, but the maps of the time are telling a different story. For example, this map from 1757 clearly features an existing Frederiks Church, with a footprint that includes its 2 original flanking towers. And this map from 1761 also features Frederiks Church. We see the same footprint on maps from 1770 and 1800. And I find it hard to believe that all these maps would include an unfinished building's plan as an actual mapped location. So by the time these photographs were taken, around 1870, what we're actually seeing is a building that has been not partially built, but partially demolished. My theory here is that this view of the church, in this 1766 engraving, actually existed. It seems likely that in the early 1760s, improvements and/or structural concealments were made according to the architectural plans drawn up by Nikolai Eigtved. Inside the church today is this urn honoring the men who died working on what were likely structural improvements or changes to the original building. The dates fall mostly during the 1760s. Every inscription of the year begins not with a 1, but with the letter J, as they seem to be using the letter J to substitute for 1, as we see here in the date of July 31st. I also think there's actual evidence here indicating a mud flood, beyond simply the covered windows and doors that we see at both the Marble Church and Amalienborg. If we look closely at the drawings of the Marble Church ruins, we can see that between these columns are upside-down curved arcs or arches. You can just make out the curve terminating at the dirt. This doorway's threshold is also curved, but this makes no sense. People don't normally walk on curved surfaces. This just doesn't look like a ground-level entrance to this building. Judging from these curved areas, it seems that people were never meant to be walking between these columns or entering through this opening. This looks like second-story embellishment that we're seeing at ground level. And the original plans of Nikolai Eigtved corroborate this theory, as he had placed 6 decorative columns on the building's second story. Eigtved's plans don't correspond exactly to the ruins we see in the photographs, but I believe this is because the purpose of his 1754 plans were to alter or conceal certain technological aspects of a building that already existed, the same building we see depicted here in the 1766 Priestler engraving of the completed Amalienborg. And it would be after 1766, after Amalienborg was built and the alterations were made to the Marble Church in the 1760s, that the mud flood would have taken place. It's further proposed that the demolition of the church building began after the liquefaction event, either in the late 1700s or early 1800s. It's likely that the demolition of the solid marble structure proved rather difficult, as we've seen in many other attempts to demolish these ancient and very solidly constructed buildings. So the controllers changed the plan, removing all the tech, and instead rebuilt a smaller version of the original building, using the existing walls that were too difficult to remove. We can still see that original front wall here. The key to the public swallowing this official narrative put forth by the controllers was a clever bit of media manipulation in 1874. To explain the building's reconstruction in a way that would prevent certain questions about its history from the public, a deal was made between Denmark's finance minister and C.F. Tietjen, Denmark's elitist equivalent to J.P. Morgan. In exchange for covering the church's construction costs, Tietjen was given the rights to develop land around the church. A huge corruption scandal ensued, complete with a lawsuit brought against the finance minister, but he was, of course, eventually found not guilty. Whenever a member of the elite is publicly accused of one crime, it's likely a distraction to cover up another. The proof of this comes when the elite member in question is either found not guilty or given a slap on the wrist. And what this scandal did was to derail any idle chit-chat surrounding the church's reconstruction, turning its focus instead on the scandal and drowning out any curiosity into the real mystery of why this church stood in ruins and required reconstruction in the first place. I'm grateful for any feedback. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.